Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the My Favorite Norns script series. Today I'm talking about Flora by Jonathan Snyder. Flora is an L system sequencer and bandpass filtered sawtooth engine. To be completely transparent, I had tried Flora months ago, but I was overwhelmed by the complexity and didn't dive into it too much. Thankfully, my interest was renewed by a comment on Instagram asking me to look into it, and I'm very happy I did because this is one of the most interesting sequencers I've come across and the synth engine sounds great. Before I get into the script, I want to briefly talk about L systems. Jonathan gives a bit of background in the README, so I won't get too deep into it, but basically L systems were created as a mathematical model of plant development. The basic components are the Turtle graphics engine, which creates a drawing from instructions, an alphabet, which is a set of characters that represent instructions for the algorithm to interpret, an axiom, which is a sentence containing one or more characters, rule sets, which are made up of two strings, the predecessor, which is normally made up of one character, and the successor, which is one or more characters. Angles, which tell the turtle to rotate clockwise or counterclockwise, and generations, which represent a completed execution of the algorithm. Jonathan also lays out a basic example of how the algorithm functions in the README. The axiom for this algorithm is B. Rule set 1 says if B is encountered, replace it with A. Rule set 2 says if A is encountered, replace it with AB. If this is allowed to run for 6 generations, it will end up looking like this. Flora has its own alphabet for writing rule sets and is made up of the following symbols. The turtle encountering one of these symbols will change the sound that's being generated by the engine. F will move the turtle forward and draw a line and a circle. G will move the turtle forward and draw a line. An open bracket will save the current position. A closed bracket will restore the last saved position. A plus sign will rotate the turtle counterclockwise by the current angle. A minus sign will rotate the turtle clockwise by the current angle. A vertical bar will rotate the turtle 180 degrees. R will randomly increase or decrease the angle each frame. An exclamation mark will randomly set an angle. There are some other characters available from this alphabet that are mainly used for writing the rule sets. Flora generates music by using the angles encountered by the algorithm to change the pitch of the notes. The pitch change amount is calculated by multiplying the angle measured by the current pitch. The pitch changes are quantized, so the pitch will only change if the product is greater than a whole number. Flora uses a unique synth engine that's based off of Eli Fieldsteel's marimba demonstration from Super Collider tutorial number 15, composing a piece part 1. Flora's engine is made up of a sawtooth oscillator and a bandpass filter. Unlike most synths where the note you're hearing is derived from the frequency of the oscillator, this engine instead produces its pitch from the center frequency of the bandpass filter. Moving on to the Norns controls, you can navigate between the pages with encoder 1. Page 1 is the plant page. To select the active plant, hold button 1 and turn encoder 1. To replace the active plant, hold button 1 and turn encoder 2. There are many different shapes here. For example, plant 3 is generated by the algorithm used to create Penrose tiling, and plant 13 is based on staghorn coral. Plant 13's form is generated randomly, so each time you select it, it will be different. Encoder 3 will increase or decrease the angle of the plant's branches. Buttons 2 and 3 will cycle between the previous and next generations. Button 1 and button 3 will reset the plants to their original forms and restart their sequences. The second page is the modify page. Once again, holding button 1 and turning encoder 1 will select the active plant. Encoder 2 will scroll through the controls. Encoder 3 will select the letter on the succession and axiom screens. Encoder 1 and encoder 3 will change control or letter values. Pressing button 3 will add a letter and button 2 will delete it. Holding button 1 and then pressing button 3 will reset the plants to their original forms. From this page, you can adjust the parameters of the algorithm by setting the number of rule sets, adjusting rule sets 1 and 2, setting the axiom, setting the starting generation, and setting the max number of generations. We can also set the init length, which controls the length in pixels for each segment of the plant. The final group of controls here will determine the characteristics of the plants as they are drawn on the screen. The mod angle sets the angle the turtle will turn each time it encounters a plus or minus in a rule set. The mod init angle is the angle that is set when the initial shape is drawn. Mod X start and mod Y start define the location on the screen that the plant will grow from. These controls are all cosmetic and won't have any effect on the sound. To set the axiom and rule sets 1 and 2, you'll need to refer to the alphabet I mentioned earlier. There are a few additional letters that aren't explicitly mentioned in the chart. Those letters are A, M, N, O, P, X, and Y. These letters are used for communication between the rule sets and the axiom. The next page is the Observe page. This page is used for admiring the plants you've created. Button 1 in Encoder 1 will once again select the plant. Encoder 2 will move the plant left or right. And Encoder 3 will move the plant up or down. Buttons 2 and 3 will zoom in and out. And once again, pressing buttons 1 and 3 will reset the plants to their original forms and restart the sequences. Up next, we have the Plow page. This page controls the AMP envelope. Unlike most standard ADSR type envelopes, this one can have anywhere from 3 to 20 points along its length. There are 2 envelopes on this page, one for each plant. The controls are similar to the previous pages. Holding button 1 and turning encoder 1 will select the plant. Encoder 2 cycles through the different envelope controls. And encoder 3 adjusts the value. Buttons 2 and 3 will add or delete control points. The envelopes have the following controls: envelope level, which determines the maximum amplitude of the envelope; envelope length, which determines the length of the envelope; node time, which controls when the node is processed by the envelope; node level, which sets the amplitude of the envelope at that specific node; and curve, which controls the shape of the ramp from the prior node. Holding button 1 and then pressing button 3 will bring up the plow modulation options. You can navigate this menu the same way you navigate the other menus, using encoder 2 to cycle through the options and encoder 3 to adjust them. Mod prob determines the global probability that modulation will occur. Time prob determines the probability that the time value for each of the nodes will be modulated. Time mod amount sets how much modulation will be applied to the node. After those, we have the same format for level and curve. The final page is the water page. We get access to a ton of controls from here. The controls follow the same pattern as the other pages, with encoder 2 selecting a control and encoder 3 adjusting it. Going through the menu, we have AMP, which determines the overall amplitude of the outputs; P1 note duration, which controls plant 1's note duration; P2 note duration, which controls plant 2's note duration. Note scalar is the number that is multiplied by the current angle of the plant, which then determines whether a new pitch is triggered. A higher number will increase the chance that the next note is different. CF scalars are a way to randomly change the octave of the note being triggered. Number of scalars will set the amount of random octave changes possible per note, and then you can set each scalar's octave shift individually with the CF scalar parameter. RQ min and max set the range of the bandpass filter's RQ value, which is the inverse of Q. Q is similar to the resonance control on a low pass or high pass filter. The lower the RQ value, the longer and smoother the tone will be, and the higher the RQ value, the more percussive it becomes. Number of note frequencies creates a pool of notes that can be triggered by the engine. NF controls let you adjust the properties of those notes. The NF controls are displayed as a fraction. The numerator represents the number of pings, and the denominator sets the length of time in which those pings will occur. If the value is set to 2 to 1, then there will be 2 pings per clock cycle. The number on the right displays the calculation. So if you set the value to 4 over 2, it will be simplified to 2 over 1. The denominator can also be further fine-tuned. The whole number can be adjusted to within 0.01 of the next higher or lower number by either adding or subtracting a decimal. If you subtract from the denominator, the pings can increase into audio rate repeats. As you decrease the denominator, you can see that the number of pings per cycle greatly increases. The ping rate is closely tied to the envelope length, and if there are more pings than the envelope length is long, then only the pings that fit within that time window will be heard. Before I move into the parameters page, I want you to hear what some of these changes sound like. So I'm going to decrease the denominator. We're getting into audio right here. As it increases, the number of pings per cycle decrease. Also want to show what the number of scalars does. So like I said, as you add more scalars, you get access to this menu, which will let you change the octave of the individual scalars. So I'm going to increase the first one by 1 octave and increase the second one by 2. So now each time a note will be triggered, it will be randomly decided from that pool of 3 notes. Next we have the parameters page, and there's a whole lot going on here. I'm just going to go down the list in order. Page Turner allows you to flip between the menu pages and can be MIDI mapped. Active Plant Switcher sets which plant you're referencing and can also be MIDI mapped. Scale Mode determines which scale the pitches are being pulled from, and there are over 35 different scales included. Root Note sets the root note of the scale. Bandsaw Engine controls where the engine is receiving MIDI information from. If it's set to plants, the engine will be sequenced by the plants. If it's set to plants and MIDI, it will receive external MIDI as well as MIDI from the internal sequencer, which allows you to play along with the sequencer. MIDI will make the internal sequencer inactive and instead receive note information from an external MIDI device like a keyboard. And off will stop the engine from producing sound. The MIDI submenu has all the controls you'll need for interfacing with external MIDI devices. From here you can set the MIDI in and out device, enable or disable MIDI velocity, and set the MIDI channels for both in and out. Having independent MIDI channels for each plant allows them to be sequenced by different devices or MIDI tracks. There are also submenus for Crow, Just Friends, and the Whimsical Wraps module W2. I'm not going to be covering these because I don't use them. The Plants and Plows submenus have all the same controls as their respective main menu pages. The Water submenu has an additional parameter though, which is the Tempo Scalar Offset, which will offset the pings on a global level. Selecting Load Basic Sequence will return the plants to their default state. The next 2 submenus are effects. First is the Wow and Flutter menu. The first option will enable or disable the effect. Wobble RPM determines the speed of the wobbles. Amp determines the mix. Wobble EXP controls how quickly the wobbles happen. Flutter Amp will control the mix of the flutter with the engine. Flutter Fixed Frequency determines the rate of the flutter, with high values bordering into FM territory. Flutter Variation Frequency will modulate the flutter fixed frequency. The second is the Pitch Shift menu. This effect uses the Super Collider Pitch Shift UGen. The first parameter is Pitch Shift, which is basically a dry-wet control for the effect. Grain Size sets the size of the grain window in seconds. Time Dispersion is a random offset in seconds to the delay of each grain. After that, we have Pitch Shift Note Controls 1, 2, and 3. The pitch shifts run in order and adjust the pitch in semitones. The final submenu is the Preset Sequencer menu. From here you can program a sequencer that will cycle through saved presets. Setting Preset Sequencer Enable to True will activate the sequencer. There are a few different sequencer modes here. We have Loop, Up and Down, or Random. Load Preset will tell you which preset you want to start on, and then you can adjust the length of the sequence with beats and beats per bar. And with first and last, you can set which preset the sequencer starts with and ends with. Down here, you can also toggle off certain parameters being recalled by the preset. Finally, at the end of the parameters menu, we have the gardening feature. These controls let you save plants to your Norns as well as download other users' plants that were submitted to the community garden. For this to work, you'll need the Norns Online script. I know this was very dense, but hopefully it helped demystify this script. I have to thank Fellowist Finch for suggesting this as a topic, otherwise I may never have taken the time to really dig in. One of the coolest things about this script in my opinion is the preset sequencer. Jonathan has actually made this available as a mod, which can be used with other scripts that don't have it built in. I'll link the lines page below. Before I go, I just want to give a huge shout out to Jonathan for taking the time to answer all the questions I had and even get on a Zoom call with me to clear up some confusion I had around the note frequency controls. That's going to do it for today. Thanks for watching. If there are any specific scripts or other topics you'd like me to cover in a future episode, leave a comment below, and I'll see you next week.